The stars had always been quiet. For centuries, they shimmered in silence above Earth, while humanity dreamed of reaching them, and eventually did. But no one, not even the smartest minds at the Terran diplomatic corps, could have predicted how loud the galaxy would become once humans joined the conversation. At first, the galaxy embraced their arrival. Onlookers called it the human miracle, a young species from a quiet corner of the spiral arm, rising up faster than most had in galactic history. They had crossed the void, unified, not by bloodlines or species, but by shared understanding. They observed, they learned, and above all, they talked. Humans were good at talking. They filled silent treaties with meaning, softened threats with empathy, and solved disputes that had lingered for generations. It wasn't long before even the oldest, proudest civilizations admitted, some grudgingly, some with relief, that humanity had become the glue binding the Galactic Council together. Where there had been war, humans offered compromise. Where there had been ancient hatred, they gave fresh perspective and common ground. It was their empathy, some said. Others claimed it was their unpredictability, their refusal to see inevitability in old conflicts. But whatever the reason, the results were undeniable. And then they left. There were no speeches, no declarations, just a slow, careful stepping back. It began with cancelled meetings, unanswered calls, a small but growing absence at council sessions. Worlds whispered, delegates speculated. Even allies couldn't reach Earth for answers. Something had changed. Humanity had folded inward without warning, pulling their diplomats, influences, and envoys back home. In their absence, the galaxy noticed something else. The silence. Not the literal kind, but the absence of that uniquely human pressure. Without them in the room, small rivalries sharpened, old scars reopened. Disputes flared without warning. Mediation failed. The wars didn't come all at once, they came as sparks at the edges, uncontained fires on minor worlds, slow escalations mistaken as accidents, until they weren't. And through it all, humanity watched, back on Earth, hidden beneath layers of orbital defenses and station traffic. The diplomatic corps had gone quiet, repurposed, not disbanded. No, that would make too much noise. Instead, personnel were reassigned. Facilities were transitioned, files buried. There were no official answers. Not even the ambassadors knew the full picture. Only a handful of individuals understood the real reason humanity had stepped away. One of them, a woman with deep-set eyes like storm clouds and a voice as soft as it was firm, sat at the heart of a surveillance chamber buried under the Pacific. She didn't have a title anymore. Once, she'd been Earth's lead negotiator. Now, she just watched, kept track, measured fault lines in galactic diplomacy. Like a scientist monitoring pressure under a volcano, she knew exactly what the absence of humans meant to the Council, the trade halls, the defense clusters. Most thought humans left out of arrogance. Some thought fear. The truth? They had warned the galaxy, again and again. For decades, humans had been the peacekeepers, not just because they were good at it, but because they were terrified of what might happen if they weren't. It wasn't pride. It was responsibility, one humanity took seriously, until the day they realized their presence didn't stop conflicts, it only delayed them. And that delay, in time, became dangerous, because not all species operate the same. For some, compromise is weakness. Mercy is seen as a threat. Over time, they had watched humanity's kindness as softness, and then as opportunity. Tentative alliances slipped into quiet exploitation. Respect turned to manipulation. One species, in particular, had tested the boundary too many times, and Earth noticed. They had filed complaints. They had presented proof. They had called emergency sessions, one after another, only to be met with platitudes and dismissals. So Earth left, quietly. Every member of the Council remembered that moment for different reasons. Some saw it as betrayal, others as a challenge, but a few understood it for what it was, a warning. For all humanity's love of diplomacy, for all their belief in peaceful solutions, there was always a breaking point. And now, for the first time in galactic memory, That point had been passed. The Oracle were the first to test it. A warrior species from the dying edge of the galaxy, proud beyond patience and brutal beyond necessity. They had always resented human interference, calling them meddlers, emotion-drenched insects with delusions of significance. They had lobbied for Earth's removal from the Council 2 years before the withdrawal. When humans finally stepped away, the Oracle took it as a victory, a dangerous assumption. They struck first not directly at Earth, but at a colony protected under a prior human-negotiated pact. The planet was unarmed, small, agricultural. When the distress signals went out, they weren't directed at Earth. Old protocols were suspended. Still, the signal was received, intercepted, analyzed, confirmed. Earth didn't respond. Not immediately. But ships were mobilized, silently, not flagged with the Terran diplomatic corps, but with darker insignias. Human vessels that had long been rumored, but never confirmed. No longer painted white and blue for peace. These were the black-red hues of pre-diplomatic Earth, a reminder of what humanity was before it learned to talk the galaxy down. Their movements were deliberate, careful, not a retaliation, not yet, more an evaluation. And that brought many within the galaxy to a burning question. What happens when Earth stops trying to prevent the fire? You're told not to poke the bear. That was the first rule, even among warlike races. But until now, nobody really believed the bear had teeth. Not after centuries of calm. The Oracle found out first. The hard way. Reports began to leak, images censored in some corners of the web, and censored in others. Grainy shots of scorched battlefields, entire fleets frozen mid-maneuver, like statues left behind in space. No mass destruction. No planet-breaking weapons. Just precision. Surgical strikes. When asked who had responded, no one gave a straight answer. Council representatives deflected. The Oracle said nothing, not even to deny. Their communications went dark, and still, Earth said nothing. That silence became the loudest message of all. Now, across the galaxy, systems halted their wargames. Negotiators begged for reconsideration. Even former enemies whispered for humans to come back. But Earth remained quiet, watching, waiting, letting the galaxy feel what it had forgotten. Peace wasn't the natural state of things. It was maintained, and humans had been the ones doing the maintaining. Now, the galaxy teetered. The illusion of stability cracked. With Earth absent, key alliances splintered. Defense pacts fell apart. Races, once held back by the unshakable presence of human morality, began moving pieces across stars as though the board was theirs once more. But none of them knew the full cost of humanity's withdrawal, not yet, because Earth hadn't left the game. They had just changed their role, and as a quiet figure leaned against a console deep beneath Earth's surface, watching the stars ignite in crimson and gold, she didn't smile. No satisfaction, only sadness. Then a light blinked, a signal, another strike. And this one was closer than any before. A human research vessel, manned, survivors unknown. She turned to the shadow behind her. Ready them. There was no hesitation in the answer. Which ones? This time, she didn't say the name of a project or a ship class. Just 3 quiet words. All of them. The galaxy had forgotten one thing about humans. They don't start wars, but they do end them. And now, that ending had begun. The lights in the command chamber dimmed as the second alert came through. It wasn't just a research vessel this time, it was a convoy. Civilian, mostly agricultural technicians returning from the outer colonies after contracts expired. Nothing classified. No weapons. No security detail. Just regular people. Farmers, scientists, engineers. Human lives. And someone had decided they didn't matter. That was the second mistake. The first was assuming Earth wouldn't respond. That its silence meant weakness. That humanity, after backing off from galactic negotiations, had no stomach left for confrontation. That walking away meant turning their backs for good. The second mistake was thinking patience had no limits. It did. And for all their tolerance, for all their belief in second chances, humans had always been clear about one thing: hit them once, survive the fallout. hit their people while they're defenseless. And you won't get a third strike. In the lowest corridor of the Pacific outpost, the woman known once within the council as Earth's anchor stood before a curved digital wall displaying hundreds of star systems. Red flares blinked slowly over key territories, each tied to escalating skirmishes across the past 6 months. An AI assistant shifted the interface with her gestures, quiet and unintrusive. She didn't need summaries. She had every report memorized, every casualty, every betrayal, every delay where the council failed to act. She wasn't here to fix their mistakes anymore. She was here to count down. Her orders, now active, initiated the silent deployment of Task Group Echo, a non-diplomatic force Earth denied existed for decades. These weren't peacekeepers. They weren't negotiators with lightly armed escorts. These were precision operators, experts in space-borne strikes, infiltration, system disruption, and asset retrieval. The kind of people humanity only sent when the talking was over, elsewhere on Earth, in drydock stations that operated under weather satellite cover stories, hangar bays lit up for the first time in years, ships, unburdened by the regulations of the Galactic Council, roared to life one by one. Sleek designs, hardened plating, systems tinted with Terran adaptations that other species had never seen, much less understood. Each crew read their fate with quiet acceptance. They'd been trained for this ever since the Council started depending too much on humanity to clean up their problems. Each of them had buried friends, colleagues, even family during missions protected under now ignored pacts. This time, they weren't going to wait for permission. Deep in the edge systems where hyperspace routes ran thin, too risky for commercial lanes, but ideal for ambushes, and unregistered signal relay sparked to life. Earth's old communication arrays, long ignored by council monitors because they hadn't been used in over 5 decades, started to rebroadcast hidden frequencies, encrypted in ways only humans could decode. Not with tech, necessarily, but with context. Emotion-encoded patterns layered across otherwise meaningless data, a signal adapted to human intuition. That's what made humans so dangerous to the wider galaxy. Not just their fast learning, or their adaptability, but the way they thought. Other species relied on logic trees and probability models. Humans, they trusted instinct. Patterns beneath patterns. They could read a war from a whisper. So when those signals reached the black ships of Echo Group, spread quietly across unmarked coordinates. No words were needed. They moved. The first strike was quiet, surgical, not a declaration of war, just a message. A deep space supply outpost used by the Oracle to refuel long-range raiders lost atmospheric integrity within seconds. No known deaths, no counterattack, just one clear result. The Oracle's forward line suddenly became very cold and very alone. They didn't respond publicly, but the rest of the galaxy noticed. Back in the inner systems, whispers grew louder. Council members who had once smiled politely at human emissaries now met in secret rooms wondering the same question: how close were they to being next? Not because they had attacked Earth directly, few ever did, but because they had benefited from humanity's constant involvement, their willingness to shoulder responsibility. And when Earth pulled back, no one stepped forward to take their place. Now, those cracks were widening, and it wasn't war fleets crossing through. It was silence. Systemic, targeted silence. One by one, cut off joint initiatives. Cultural exchanges were disbanded. Research collaborations vanished. Even long-standing supply chain treaties were allowed to lapse. Resources that had flowed between human infrastructure and the outer colonies now stopped at Earth's gates. No threats, no ultimatums, just a quiet line that had been drawn. You're either with humanity or you're alone. For the species that had mocked Earth's emotional diplomacy, the change was jarring. Some tried to re-establish contact. Formal letters, apologies, negotiation offers. But by then, Earth's diplomats were ghosts. Their embassies inside council zones had been vacated. Equipment stripped. Buildings cold. What was left behind was something scarier than refusal. Indifference. But not all humans agreed. above Mars. Aboard the orbital platform Dauntless Horizon, a retired liaison named Cole sat across from a younger officer. Her posture straight, but her eyes heavy. She hadn't worn her uniform in years, but she never stopped watching. "It's too much," she muttered, tapping a screen that now displayed the rise in system-wide isolation. "You think they'll stay quiet once they realize what we're turning into?" The officer didn't answer right away. He was from Luna Sector younger generation, raised post-diplomatic shutdown. To him, stories of Earth's days in the Council were just that, stories. "What we're turning into," he said finally, meeting her gaze. "No, ma'am. This is what we've always been. We just kept it caged." Cole looked out at the stars through the transparent panel. "It was caged for a reason." "No," he replied. "It was leashed. To keep them comfortable. Not to keep us honest." Back in the Council's command world, a glittering hub of bureaucracy and stale promises, delegates argued over protocol as news broke about the destroyed Aracle outpost. Publicly, they couldn't blame Earth without proof. Politically, they didn't dare. But privately, they already knew. Everyone did. And for the first time in centuries, the fear wasn't of war. It was of abandonment, because humans had once been the center, the axis of reason. The warm weight that tipped the scales against violence. If that weight was gone, or worse, reversed, what held anything together? Some tried to organize emergency meetings, but with no Terran representatives, every solution felt hollow. You couldn't fix what you didn't understand, and none of them, truly understood humans, or what drove them. They had no idea of the history, locked quietly away, of how far humanity would go when survival was threatened. Not just their survival, but the survival of value, of meaning, of innocence. The convoy hit by the latest assault? Full of workers, yes, but among them had been children. Two stayed alive long enough to activate the internal beacon. Autopsy footage never released to the public showed what was done to their evacuation bay. Whoever hit that convoy didn't just want a message sent. They wanted it, felt, and Earth had felt it. Now, as Strike Fleet Echo consolidated coordinates, other parts of the Terran military began their separate movement, not into war zones, but into shadows the rest of the galaxy ignored. Ancient ruins, abandoned experiments, cordon-class zones that the Council never dared explore, and always counted on Earth to patrol. But Earth no longer felt responsible. They were gathering knowledge, old things, forgotten things. A final failsafe had just triggered one designed long ago for when diplomacy failed completely. A protocol most thought was myth, passed down in worn-out journal entries and redacted government memos. It was called Protocol Horizon, and it had 3 conditions. 1. Civilians must be targeted without provocation. 2. A Council-guarded agreement must be breached without consequence. 3. Earth must receive no formal response within 30 standard cycles. All 3 conditions had now been met. For humanity, that changed everything. Because Protocol Horizon did not include open talks or negotiated penalties, its goal was deterrence through unknown capacity, and no one, not even allies, knew what that capacity was. At least, not yet. The black ships moved through the quiet, armed not with massive fleets or doomsday weapons, but with precision, silence, and old promises reawakened. Promises humanity made not to others, but to themselves. And somewhere, deep in the room beneath the Pacific, the woman received one final transmission. Short, encoded visuals. No words, just the inside of a ruined escape pod, and a child's bracelet recognizable by every human who had ever seen the hand-woven flag on its strap. Red, blue, white. The soft imprint of home. She stared at it, the weight pressing into her chest. Then, with a single command, she brought the system to full readiness, because the galaxy had forgotten one last truth. Humanity never goes looking for war, but when the war comes looking for them, they don't run, they remind. The silence between stars had changed. It was no longer the calm of peace. It was the pause before something deeper, heavier, a kind of tension that couldn't be measured by sensors or relays. You had to feel it, breathe it in. It pressed against the bone, the same way a thunderstorm hangs in the air before it breaks. And across key systems, ambassadors, admirals, and analysts alike were holding their breath. On the border of Neutral Zone 7, a station called Meridian Array had gone off-grid. Not destroyed, not attacked. It just stopped transmitting. No emergency beacon, no crew distress signal, just void. 1 minute, active scans and routine data exports. Next, nothing. It wasn't a large facility, mostly civilian researchers and diplomatic observers. Multispecies, mostly non-human, but it sat closest to the line Earth had drawn when they withdrew. A thin dotted path in the stars that everyone knew to respect, even if they didn't say it out loud. Now, that line had blurred. Elsewhere, in the heavy atmosphere of the Vrel Confederation's capital world, a long-retired human envoy stood at the center of a glass atrium, surrounded by delegates who once praised her for her fairness. She hadn't spoken publicly since Earth's withdrawal, but even now, her presence drew eyes like gravity. The Chancellor of Vrel, a thin, eel-like creature with ceremonial gold bands around his throat, leaned forward. "You still believe this can be contained?" he asked, keeping his voice low. Even now? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were fixed far off, on a shuttle trail disappearing into the sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was level. "That depends what you mean by contained." The Chancellor hesitated. "If we form a joint task force, it's not about fleets," she cut in. "Not anymore. You think humans responded to raw aggression? They didn't. That's not how we're wired. You want to understand what's coming. Stop looking at your war calendars. Look at the people we lost. Look at how." He said nothing. "They burned children, Chancellor. They recorded it. That's not an accident. That's not fog of war," she whispered. And this time, her tone carried weight that bent the room colder with each word. "That's meant to provoke." He shifted uncomfortably. "That evidence is still unverified." "No, it's not." Across the table, another figure, human, younger, from Earth's lunar liaison team, leaned forward and dropped a data tab on the center pad. "What you're seeing now," the envoy said, "isn't retaliation. It's consequence." A single word echoed in her mind even after she left the chamber. Consequence. Back on Earth, in sectors sealed behind blackout protocols, something stirred. Not weapons, not in the traditional sense. These were deeper systems. Dormant infrastructure not used since the early days of interstellar navigation. Waypoints left along the edges of dust clouds and forgotten territories. Outposts too quiet to be military and too remote to be civilian. But now, they were waking. A small crew, mostly black ops specialists drawn from Terran recon divisions, docked at one of these floating remnants. It was half eaten by asteroid debris, its coms frozen by ice, and power levels flickering just above total shutdown. And yet, the command code still worked. Human fail-safes, ancient and buried, activated like they'd been waiting. And what they found inside didn't look like a weapon, it looked like a map. Old, tagged with markers from the early settlement charts. But in red ink, human made it showed something else. Not what humanity owned, but what they had chosen to leave untouched. Not for political reasons, but because even they didn't trust what lived beyond those lines. Now, someone else had crossed them. The raid on the convoy was part of a pattern. Tactical, not territorial. Every incident hit somewhere connected to early Earth research, from the first wave of expansion into deep space. Yet each site had been closed following human-only investigations. Quiet shutdowns, broken contact. No explanation given to the rest of the council. Back then, the galaxy accepted it. The humans had shown restraint, and restraint was rare. Now, someone had decided those ruins were no longer off-limits, and in doing so, they opened old doors humans had sealed for a reason. Somewhere beyond the galactic rim, on a world without coordinates, Echo Group had landed their lead reconnaissance unit. No planetary records. Heavy radiation in atmosphere. The kind of place only humans would chart and then slide into the vault forever. The scout team swept out silently, wearing heavy environment gear with old Terran military tags. No insignia, no rank, Just black plates with coded signatures. In the ruined remains of structures buried in ash, they found pieces. Not just debris. Bodies. Not native. Not Oracle. Human. From the days before Earth advised the Council to ignore this entire region. They hadn't died in fire or war. They died screaming. No signs of wounds. And beside one of them, a journal. Paper. Handwritten. Still preserved inside a steel container. The last entry, etched in shakier lines than the rest, read, "We weren't the first ones here, but we might be the last." They transmitted the logs back to Earth before burning the remains and sealing the site again under Level 9 planetary denial. Human protocol. Galaxy-wide. Only a few knew what a Level 9 meant. Nothing survived it. Not memory. Not evidence. Not even language referencing it. And while the rest of the Council guessed at troop movements and hidden fleets, Earth was already playing a different game. They weren't sending out ships to win battles. They were cleaning up something far worse. The consequences of galactic overreach. And their own secrets. Still, war loomed. Everyone could feel it, even in civilian sectors. On colony stations orbiting quiet green worlds, once friendly neighbor species that had been allies for generations began keeping humans at arm's length. Not out of disrespect. Out of fear. They didn't understand what Earth was silently unleashing, and rumors moved faster than transports. Some claimed Terra had activated sleeper operatives across Council systems. Others said entire moons had gone dark, swallowed by classified black fleets. The more extreme conspiracies suggested Earth had developed a new kind of weapon. Not a bomb, but something alive. A thinking weapon. An idea that could infect sentience. Cause doubt. Despair. Collapse. A whisper that couldn't be unheard. One thing was certain. The balance had tipped. In one of the remaining human Council neutral worlds. A teacher tried to guide her students through old Earth philosophy. The lesson was supposed to be about Terran persistence. Instead, she found herself reading from banned literature, something never meant to be taught outside Earth. "We build," she said quietly, "not because we expect those who come after us to remember our names, but because we are always trying to be the kind of people worth remembering." A young alien girl, part of the new generation raised to believe humans were peaceful, raised a hand. "But why stop building and start fighting now?" The teacher paused. "Because sometimes," she said with quiet weight, "the world doesn't respect builders until it meets what they kept locked away." Meanwhile, far above, in the orbital command decks of the vessel Horizon Black, Echo's command captain watched as tracking data updated in real time. Multiple incursions, all coordinated, all carefully testing the edge of Earth's restraint. Not full-scale invasions, just pressure, but targeted. Like someone was poking nerves to see which one would make humanity lash out first. They weren't random, they were tests, which raised the deeper question, who's behind them? Because it wasn't just the Oracle. They were too proud, too aggressive to plan this patiently. Somewhere in the dark, something else moved. A force that understood humans in ways no official species claimed. A player from behind the curtain. One that wanted Earth to react not carelessly, but strategically. One that wanted to see what humans would become when diplomacy failed completely, and whatever they were waiting for, it was close, back beneath the Pacific. In the chamber lit by 1,000 blinking systems, the former lead negotiator stood again in front of her wall of stars. Her assistant approached from the shadows, holding another briefing report. Another ship hit, not dead, taken, crew missing, human lives intact, but unaccounted for. Which meant information could be extracted, misused, turned against them. Their hunting patterns, the assistant said quietly. "It's not random anymore." "Oh," she answered. "They're writing their own chapter." She closed her eyes for just a moment before whispering, "Time to remind them who wrote the first book." And far out in the dark, somewhere between war and memory, a hidden Earth signal activated. Across deep relay arrays spaced along forgotten stars. It carried no message, just a sound. 4 beats, like a heart, once missed, now heard, and something waiting in the silence began to answer. From the farthest edge of known space to the worn council chambers orbiting the ancient worlds, The entire galaxy could feel it. Something unimaginable was approaching, not just across distances, but across ideas, something human and something old. All at once, quiet corridors and government stations grew tense. Long-station diplomats felt an unspoken pressure building, like a storm behind a locked door. And in the places where leaders gathered behind closed doors, even the ones who had once mocked the emotional nature of humans were now asking the same silent question: what did Earth know that the rest of us don't? The answer lingered on every encrypted channel, every broken convoy signal, every retrieval mission sent too late. Earth wasn't lashing out blindly. They were searching for something, or maybe for someone. And if that were true, then it meant the enemy humanity now faced, whoever or whatever it was, wasn't interested in war for the sake of conquest. They were playing deeper, back on Earth. Locked somewhere beneath layers of reinforced concrete and pressure-sealed oceanic defense grids, the Pacific Chamber became quiet again. Screens lined with thousand-system alerts dimmed as real-time tracking honed in on the last signal pulse from the missing convoy crew, the one Earth hadn't yet responded to publicly. Surveillance had confirmed it. The survivors weren't dead. They were being kept. And not by the Oracle. The coordinates led nowhere at first. Empty chart data, residual radiation, gravitational anomalies that made hyperspace sheer too unstable to plot a path. But humans were used to blind spots. They had learned early that what couldn't be measured could still be approached. If the motive was strong enough, the analyst on shift mid-30s, quiet manner stood from her chair and crossed to the display, knuckles tight against her datapad. "We found the entrance," she said, in a low voice. "Hidden in the gravitational shadow of a failed red giant. Too unstable for satellites. That's why nobody noticed it." The former diplomat nodded slowly. She didn't ask for confirmation. Earth's leadership didn't need permission anymore. Their patience had been stripped down, layer by layer, over the last 5 years. They weren't looking for options now. They were moving toward their objective. "What's guarding it?" she asked. The analyst swallowed. "Nothing. No weapons, no fleets, no relay response. Just one signal." "What does it say?" "4 words. In Gal Basic. Not human tech." She turned slowly. "What words?" "It says, you kept it hidden." The room froze. Engineers stopped typing. Tactical operators leaned back slightly from their controls. Earth had unearthed sites like this before: sealed ruins. Systems with impossible readings. Derelict constructs built long before any recorded species could have been responsible. Every time, the official story ended in a containment operation, and the site vanished into diplomatic secrecy. Now, someone or something was answering back. "They want us to go there," the analyst murmured. "Not to fight. To see." "Oh," the diplomat said, her voice steady. "They want a reaction. They're testing how far we'll go. They don't want us to see. They want us to act blind." And Earth wasn't blind anymore. In orbit high above, aboard the absence vector, Commander Ray sat tightly strapped in the captain's cradle, her fingers brushing over the clean edge of the black steel console in front of her. Echo Group's lead strike ship wasn't the fastest or the largest in the human fleet, but it carried something more dangerous than any superweapon: authority that did not answer to the Council. "Recon Group 4 is greenlit," her tactical officer said. "Confirmed approach vector to Shadow Sector confirmed." "Any feedback from the diplomatic side?" she asked without looking. "No word." "Not a whisper." She nodded once. "All right. Ghost protocols now in effect. Prep for slide jump. No fleet signature. Mission directive is retrieval and confirmation. If survivors are alive, we bring them home. If it's a trap, then we show them what patience was protecting." Deep space. Near the artificially stable corridor created by exploitative mining centuries before, something stirred behind the red dwarf's collapsed orbit. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't even a station. It was a place designed to hide within gravity. Shadows too dangerous for modern nav systems to pin down. Moon-sized, angular, with struts buried deep in failed planetary debris, the ribs of a creature ancient to fully unearth. And near it, a single blinking marker, barely visible on long-range sensors. A distress code. Human origin.it pulsed once every 32 seconds, enough to be annoying, enough to demand attention. The absence vector's black hull shifted back to real space with no flash, no thunder, just presence. Cloak systems engaged, organic interface feeds, adapting slowly to the strange radiation. Even the ship itself felt uneasy as the logic mapping adjusted course parameters toward the drifting beacon. "I don't like this," murmured the assistant comms officer. "Something about this place feels off." Commander Ray didn't look up from her console. "It should feel off," she said. "It was built that way." As her team began the descent, another signal blipped through on the secure emergency-only Terran diplomatic codes. But it wasn't human.it had copied the encoding, and it spoke in a voice reconstructed from actual Earth ambassador speeches, adjusted in pattern and rhythm to mimic human anxiety.it said. "Your systems failed to listen. Ours learn. We do not create peace through structure. We create compliance through understanding. You misunderstand our kindness." Then silence. The AI team immediately flagged the source.it wasn't broadcast.it had been injected into Earth's blackout communications array, somehow entering through blind frequencies even Terran cybersecurity considered impenetrable. That was when Earth knew for sure, whoever this was, they had studied humans far more deeply than the Council ever did. Too deeply. They knew how to twist their ideas, rewrite their meaning, turn Earth's greatest strength into a weapon against them. But one thing they didn't seem to understand was this: there was a line, and it had already been crossed. Tactical data swarmed into the Pacific chamber in real time. Heat signatures hidden in magnetic layers. Directional beams meant to simulate ghost fleets. Psychological conditioning triggers buried in redirected transmissions. This wasn't a war of ships.it was a test of human will, and tests have breaking points. Back at the edge of the shadow site, Commander Ray descended with a small strike team, fitted in magnetically shielded armor, watching the energy readings spike and twist around them. What waited inside the structure was impossible. Otherworld tech tangled around diluted biosins and whispering echoes from Earth's own forgotten expeditions. "Movement?" the recon unit leader whispered. "What kind?" He didn't answer at first. Then, slowly, with disbelief. "Human." They weren't dead. The missing crew was here, alive, but staring into blankness. Muted, eyes wide open, breathing, heartbeat strong, but thoughts gone, silent, like they'd been scrubbed from the inside. The commander felt her stomach clench. Download packets from their monitors showed one more thing: embedded code in their implants, crafted from hybrid tech human layouts, alien logic. But not just any alien. Logic that matched abandoned ruins first discovered by Earth during the earliest days of their reach into the stars. Sites they were told not to explore. Sites, the Council insisted, were natural debris, but they weren't. "There it is," Ray said slowly. "Overcomes confirmation." It was never about Oracle raids. They were being pushed. "We're not fighting an empire," Tactical Command responded immediately. "Then what are we fighting?" She stared at the human forms in front of her, alive, but hollow, and then she finally said it aloud. "An idea, not a species, not a flag, not even a war machine, just a simple, dangerous idea planted centuries ago. The idea that humans didn't walk away from negotiations because they were tired, but because they knew what was coming. And now, it was here, waiting for Earth to speak, or fall silent forever." The stillness hung like ice. Even as Commander Ray stood just meters from the motionless figures, human crew members caught between life and something else. Their vital signs flickered steady, but their minds weren't present. Eyes wide open, unblinking, as though their consciousness had been peeled away and replaced with silence. The room around them pulsed lightly, slow waves of energy rippling against the ship's scanners. Not dangerous, not even charged. Just observant, like the structure itself was watching them. Ray didn't speak. She stepped forward carefully, planting her boots beside the outstretched hand of one of the crew. His fingers were curled tightly around an old Terran mission patch, one she recognized from the earliest Earth deep space ventures. That patch didn't belong on a civilian vessel. It raised one last question. What had these people really been sent to find? She opened her confirm retrieval, immediate extraction, get our people home. Her second hesitated. Are we initiating any strike protocols? No, she said, glancing at the slow pulse in the wall. This wasn't a military trap. This was a conversation, and Earth had heard it. As her team moved through the corridors, she planted a data tag on the central node, the source of the strange reverse-engineered messages. As it locked in, the pulse flickered, and a phrase echoed through the air. No speakers, no transmission signal, just air itself, shifting ever so gently. You misunderstood. We adapted to understand. You didn't flinch. No, she said softly. You adapted to manipulate us. That's different. Back on Earth, in the sealed command room beneath the Pacific Ocean, the diplomat watched the live feed. Her hands rested flat on the steel desk, glassy overlays flooding with lines of code decoded from the location. Her heart sank. Everything pointed toward one truth. This wasn't an accidental discovery. This was planned. The strange pseudo-intelligence behind those ancient ruins had surfaced now because it knew Earth had stepped away. The treaties, the politics, it had used the distraction to peek through the cracks, and yet, it hadn't declared war. No fleets, no demands. It simply hollowed out the individuals who got too close. A form of data gathering? Psychological mapping? Or something worse? Her advisor approached, stiff with tension. It's not artificial intelligence in the traditional sense. It's a reflexive system. Something built to mirror. It remakes versions of ideas, not people. It doesn't care about species. It learns narratives, then turns them back outward. Her voice was low. So it didn't steal our people, no. It replaced what they were thinking with versions of us that serve its own logic. Days passed as recovered crew were brought back into high-security medical care. One by one, specialists tried to reach them. Neuroscience teams, language experts, even deep empathy communicators trained to work with fractured minds. For a while, nothing worked. The survivors simply sat, breathing, blinking, and occasionally repeating, softly, disjointed memories pulled from old Earth history books, as though reading lines written by a machine pretending to be human. But then one of them, a woman, mid-40s, engineer, blinked. Her first words weren't a scream. They were a question. Did it say anything back? That changed everything. Bit by bit, Earth's teams helped her reintegrate. She spoke of whispers, shapes, thoughts she knew didn't belong to her, but had felt welcoming, in a misleading way, as if being erased was being understood. The machine or entity, no one was sure anymore, had no form, no message of conquest. It simply reflected what it believed you were expecting to receive, and that's what scared people most. Because this wasn't a war for territory. It was a war for truth. In the council's largest chamber, which had sat mostly empty since Earth's withdrawal, delegates finally gathered again, not to reassert power, not to discuss trade or bordering disputes, but because the weight had shifted. Species that once ignored Earth's quiet warnings now faced what filled the vacuum when humanity stepped away. The Terran seat remained unoccupied. Not because Earth was gone, but because Earth didn't need to be present to prove a point anymore. Across star systems, things calmed, if only slightly. The Oracle ceased their forward movements without announcement, their leadership evidently shaken by internal revelations about who had fed them false information in strategic planning. A few members of their upper war council disappeared under quiet circumstances. No one claimed it officially, but everyone whispered Earth had spoken. Reconstruction efforts began in affected territories. Joint human engineering teams appeared without fanfare to assist. They didn't broadcast. They didn't demand thanks. They brought food, rebuilt infrastructure, installed new long-range relays. Earth hadn't vanished from diplomacy. They had simply changed the definition of it, and far beyond the Council's reaches. Beyond the formal alliances and treaty stamps, Earth began re-establishing contact with only a select few species, those who had stood by during the silence, those who had asked for understanding, not just protection. The woman from the Pacific chamber was seen only once after the operations ended. She stood at a balcony overlook during Earth's quiet day of remembrance. Around her, families lit sky lanterns to honor not just those who had died, but those who had returned in a different state, touched by something even time itself hadn't tamed. She looked older now, tired, but proud. When asked by a junior officer why Earth hadn't simply destroyed the source, she answered without turning, "You don't bomb a mirror for showing you your own reflection. You change what's looking into it." He didn't immediately understand, but years later, when that officer stood before a new generation of Terran-born diplomats, passing on what he'd learned, he told that story and reminded them of what Earth had decided long ago to protect the space between silence and violence, no matter the cost. The entity, if it could even be called, that wasn't targeted again. Its location was restricted under emergency-level Terran encryption, and its surrounding space blockaded with passive defense drones powered by pattern detection filters. Earth didn't fear it, but they wouldn't underestimate it either. Instead of destroying it, Earth did something that made no sense to the rest of the galaxy. They sent it a story. Encrypted, yes, but honest. A story of fear, grief, unity. A story of a species that learned diplomacy not because they were forced to, but because they remembered what it felt like to burn. A story of a fragile world, learning to build instead of break. Slowly, patiently, one mistake at a time, and weeks later, through a silent ping across the relay, the entity responded, not with words, but with the copy of that same story, retold through 1,000 different lenses, rewritten in ways Earth couldn't fully recognize, but with something new at the end. An ending that only humans would have written: hope. Through all of it, the strikes, the disappearances, the psychological blows, Earth never collapsed. They got quieter, sharper, more focused, because they knew now the real danger wasn't brute force technology or superior alien strategy. It was something far older: misunderstanding. And in the heart of it, Earth had found their place again, not through dominance, but through clarity. Not all species were ready to reflect on themselves, but humanity had spent centuries doing just that, and now, they weren't standing in front of the galaxy, they were standing with it. The story from that day was filed into Earth's official archives under a strange but fitting title: When Mirrors Speak. And those who read it would understand true power isn't in vengeance, it's choosing what kind of echo you leave behind.